This show will challenge you to engage your brain. We might even provoke thoughts that change the way you work. Don't panic. Inspect, adapt, deliver. You're listening to Agile for Humans with Ryan Ripley. Learn more at ryanripley.com.
Welcome to Agile for Humans, episode number 103. Today we've got Esther Derby, Faye Thompson, and Amitai Schleier joining me, your host, Ryan Ripley. Where are we going to go today? Who knows? It could be retros, coaching. I'm sure a lot of great things are going to come out of this one. Stick around, stay tuned. We'll be right back, and we'll kick off this episode of Agile for Humans.
Welcome to Agile for Humans. Our goal is to bring humanity back into the world of software delivery with agile values, principles, and practices. We gather top agilists from around the globe to share insights and help you grow as servant leaders in your organizations. We seek to open minds, change hearts, and deliver value into the world. Now here is our host, professional Scrum trainer and agile practitioner, Ryan Ripley.
All right, we're back. Welcome to this week's episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me this week, had a great panel, almost like old school Agile for Humans, back with the panel as opposed to the individual interview. We've got Esther Derby. Esther, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Esther, you're always welcome. Thanks for joining us. Faye Thompson, out of the depths and cold and I guess the grayness of Columbus, Ohio. How are you, Faye?
I'm doing well. I hate that we're associated with grayness. Unless it's scarlet and grayness, that's fine.
Well, I'm in Northwest Indiana. The gray is real in the Midwest, and it's cold. So I guess winter is no longer coming. Winter is here.
I was on the ski hill today, and it was a balmy, sunny 30 degrees.
That sounds lovely.
In northern Minnesota.
Yes, it was quite interesting. We were having a discussion over text, and when the person in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, is encouraging others to stay warm, things have gotten weird.
Right.
Also joining us, Amitai, I believe you're in New York, aren't you?
That's right. Yes, and warm enough for my taste. Thank you.
Very good. All right, it's been a while since we've gotten together, but a last-minute Slack request and a lot of serendipity has brought us all together, and I think where we're going to start, a few episodes ago, we talked to Esther about her new initiative, her Retrospectives training on Teachable.com. And we wanted to follow up with Esther, see how that was going. But also, I know Amitai and Faye, and even myself, when I'm either training or working with teams, we all have this, I think the retro touches us in the heart just a little differently than most. We really enjoy facilitating these. We've all been trying some new experiments, and I think we'll get into some of those as well. So Esther, if we could start with you. I mean, first, I'd love to follow up from our previous episode about this experiment, but how are things going with it? What have you learned, and what kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, it was really interesting. I mean, because for me, with my decades of doing in-person experiential learning, I was really a little skeptical about doing an online course, but the technology had changed enough that I thought it was worth the experiment. And I tried to make it as interactive as possible. So I have a lot of exercises along with, text and video, and I have a Slack group. So that people can actually interact with each other and share ideas. I thought that maybe 5 people would sign up on the first day, and it was closer to 50. So I've been really pleased with the response, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback about the value of the material, but also the value of having this Slack community where people can ask questions and work through ideas with other people, with their peers, but also with me. So it's been really fantastic.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's an interesting platform. It mixes video, text. I've heard actually seeing a lot of great things on Twitter, some really cool feedback. So I'm glad that's worked out. But as far as experimentation in the retros, Esther, I know you just did this course. It was really aimed at, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're trying to get people kind of up to speed on retrospectives if they haven't perhaps gone through this type of training before, but for that next step, what are the things that you're seeing in the community as far as people experimenting, really going out there with new things? And of course, Faye and Amitai, I'm sure you've seen experimentations in the field as well. Feel free to jump in. Just curious what we're seeing as far as the new, kind of at the edge of what people are experimenting with in this space.
Well, first, I want to say that it helps to have a certain idea about a structure that helps people think together. And that's one of the main things I emphasize in my course is that, you need to have a focus, you need to have some objective and subjective data, and then you can have analysis, and then you can think about solutions or potential solutions or actions and experiments. So given that framework, I'm seeing a lot of people in my class experiment with that in really tight time frames. So not your traditional 2 weeks, but maybe every day. Or using things like liberating structures to help people think together, and incorporating the idea of, we have a focus, we have data, and we're going to use one of these liberating structures to help us think about it.
Faye or Amitai, feel free. What else are we seeing out there?
Well, I wanted to highlight too. I had a chance to join Esther and her teachable class a few weeks ago, where we just did an open discussion on a Friday afternoon about organizational change using retrospectives. And I thought it was really interesting, some of the problems that people are trying to work through. Beyond just even at the team level, but working through getting uptake or acceptance with retrospectives in their organization, and then using that opportunity to highlight some ways that the overall organization could change. So people are really embracing this technique rather than just seeing it as a necessary evil or something that they have to do as part of their defined process.
I saw a tweet, I think it was in the last week, that indicated that if you're not getting a lot of value from the retrospective, or people aren't getting engaged with it, try doing shorter ones more frequently, which certainly dovetails nicely with all the other lessons from Agile software development that I've learned. And that really appealed to me. In fact, so I think that there are many feedback loops, which are either concentric or at least tangent at a point, where there's a big one over the quarter or the half a year or a year, and then there's one about a sprint or a few sprints or a PI if you have that. And then there are these tiny feedback loops, like from day to day, minute to minute, second to second, about how the software is being developed and how the people are doing it. And for me, those are my favorites, because I come from a background, thanks to my wife, of being interested in how animals, not just humans, but all animals, learn. And for that, you need context and immediacy and a small bounded thing, where if you want to behave differently in a small way, you need the recency, you need the precision of knowing exactly what it is, not just cognitively, but emotionally and immediately, what it was that just happened, how you might want to trigger a different behavior next time, and a small and specific enough thing that we remember precisely enough that we can actually engineer ourselves a little bit. So I love the retrospectives the most that are about just now, on the spot, like between a mob rotation or even pause if it was enough to stop. I point something out, or we do a mobadoro where, every 5 rotations we automatically stop, and if anybody has anything to say, that's the time. I love the tiny ones because I think those tiny changes add up to a ton.
And it's so interesting because it solidifies the learning, right? It helps people articulate it and notice it and figure out how to incorporate it, or let it slide by, or say, well, this is just, this is an anomaly. We don't want to, incorporate this in an intentional way, but this over here we do want to incorporate in an intentional way. I think that's super interesting, and I'm curious if you've ever done clicker training, given your wife's.
No, I've heard about it, but I've not done it. No, not quite at that level.
It's super fascinating. I did clicker training with my French bulldog, and she loved it.
So I bet some of that does not apply at all to people, but maybe some abstractions about it might. Can you say more if there's the connection there?
Well, clicker training, the reason it came to mind was the immediacy and noticing a particular behavior and using that noticing to either reinforce or shape a behavior. And actually, when you're doing it with a dog, you actually have a little device that makes a very sharp click, so it calls their attention to a specific moment and their body position in a particular moment. But a similar device is actually used with gymnasts. They call it a much nicer name than clicker training. But it is a little device that associates that sound with a particular moment and with the position of your body in space, and it helps people who are elite athletes learn how to position their body correctly to do these amazing things.
Presumably they're in the middle of a flip or an exercise, and they can't watch themselves on video as they're doing it, so somebody's watching them and clicking?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Very cool. I hadn't heard the phrase Mobadoro before, Amitai. That's an interesting. It's a cadence around mobbing that fascinates me. I've also seen a lot of Twitter activity though around, and I'm glad you brought this up around. Well, if you're doing mob programming, you no longer need to do the retrospective. And I've tried to go back. Well. I don't want to argue with people. I'm trying. This is the new Ryan. The 2019 Ryan's not going to. I'm not going to engage in this online. Like, I'll reach out and say, hey, can we have a phone call or a Skype? I'm not going to do this online anymore. But it's really like I'll type some responses and delete them. Type some responses and delete them, and finally I'll go do something else. But this kind of trend is kind of bugging me a little bit, and I'm curious what you think about this idea, this kind of movement, because I'm seeing this in many, many, many places where people are saying, hey, we're in a mob, we don't retro anymore.
I've found when I poke at that a little bit, really what's happening is a lot of what Amitai just described, which is the activity of looking back at something that just happened, gathering some data about it, and then figuring out how we feel about that, what we want to do with it, and how we want to apply it going forward. Those activities are still happening. So they're just not calling it a retrospective. They're not doing it every 1 week or 2 weeks or something like that. For me, it's almost like the organization that says they don't want to use Agile, and then you say, well, is it okay if we work in small batches, and then when we get a small increment done, we come back to you and get feedback and then adjust future work according to that. Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic. Okay.
They must have experienced Agile as something else, and now we can't use that word. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I've heard people say without reflection, there is no learning. And I think the reflection is what allows you to articulate and be conscious about and kind of adjust your mental model about whatever it is, right? It's that conscious act of saying, okay, I'm examining assumptions. I'm maybe changing my assumptions. I am, I thought I was doing X, but I'm doing Y, and I'm finding it has better results. So it's a very disciplined and conscious reflective practice, and frankly, if people don't want to call it a retrospective, that's okay with me. I'm in favor of people learning consciously, no matter what they call it.
Yeah, right. I think where I had kind of a reflex to this idea is that I think there's a lot of baggage with that idea, right? There's some ideas where people are going into, well, no more sprints, no more, and that's a totally different conversation. My concern, though, is if we're just relying on, every 5 sessions of a mob, we stop and we retro. I'm worried that, and I've seen this play out, especially on Scrum teams, where the retro is largely technical, and it's largely about the work or the problem at hand. And what I really like about actually having the event, the sprint retrospective, even when you're in a mob situation, is that you pull back a bit. Mm-hmm. Start looking at that big picture again. What's our product vision? Are we getting there? Are we enjoying our time in the mob? Right?
Yeah.
These other questions you can ask that maybe in the moment may not make sense,
You're thinking about the second loop of some double loop learning, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm concerned that when teams read, or when people see, oh, this Agile expert says we don't have to do this anymore, we lose that double loop. And now it's just this continual spiral of work and feedback, which I think that's valuable. But I think that double loop, and I think it adds in that team dynamic, but also organizational alignment, which we can tend to undervalue to our own detriment, right? That double loop helps us look at, are we serving the organization through our mobbing actions in a way that they find to be that's leading to the business outcome they expect, right? Mm-hmm. How often do you stop to ask that after your 5th mobbing session?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you tend to see different things if you are looking at the micro, so, every few hours or every day, versus if you step back and you look at what are the patterns we can see over a period of several weeks or several months. So I don't see them as being mutually exclusive, and I see them as being, as much as I dislike this word, synergistic. I can't right now.
I would add to that it's the team where I saw Mobadoro for the first time was on my coding tour, which we talked about on a past show, and I sent a link for the show notes by one of the people from that team describing Mobadoro in a bit more detail. And this team not only did the every 5 rotations, let's just talk about what happened in this half hour, they also at least once a month would go on a mob walk. And this was literally like we're getting up, we're leaving the building, we're going to go walk by the river, through the forest for an hour. And by the end, they were getting pretty deep about some things, personal things, large organizational things. It was definitely head out of the weeds by the time that walk was over. So they have those concentric circles. They're not only doing the immediate few minutes. And I think that's exactly the point, is that it's not one or the other. They support each other.
Yeah, I like that idea of double loop, and I think, and then Esther's discussion around micro macro, I think that really helps clarify the concern I had, and it's good to hear that there's some that are saying, yes, that double loop is important, because I'm actually starting to see, especially in my training classes, people are coming in and discussing we don't need the retro anymore because we added mob programming to our Scrum practice. And I just, my soul kind of declines a little bit, and my head explodes for a second, and then we figure out how to move forward. But
well, I wonder what they mean when they say that. It could be that we don't try to reflect and improve anymore, but that seems really unlikely. It may mean that they feel like that particular ceremony shaped in that particular way on that cadence is less necessary than it was before, and they're happy not doing it that way anymore. What have you found when you dig deeper with them?
Yes, when we dig deeper into it, I think, Amitai, it's more of what you've explained. No one is stepping up and saying we're not interested in continuous improvement anymore. I mean, that's certainly not
that would be surprising. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That would be surprising.
Yeah, I mean that would actually give me serious pause. I mean, really, what they're discussing is, look, we work together every day. We're a stable team. We know each other very well. If there's issues, we tend to knock them out over lunch, and then get back to work. I mean, these are very, very healthy. What I'm finding is these are healthy, high-performing teams that really retro on the fly. And so what we end up getting to is, we get to this spot where I just ask a simple question. It's, look, when do you get feedback from a customer about your work? And they say, oh, that's usually towards an end of a sprint, an end of a flow process. I mean, whatever it is that they're doing. And then I ask, how do you incorporate that feedback into the way you're working? And that usually pauses them for a second. Like, oh, wait, maybe that's interesting. Because if we're retroing in a bubble, we're talking about how we're feeling. We may not be pulling business outcomes, organizational alignment, product vision. We may not be pulling those things into our discussions. That's where I'm finding some traction, and that's where I'm finding some aha moments for these teams, these kind of light bulb moments for them. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense to me. And I think part of it is that so many teams have internalized the idea that a retrospective is just, let's make 3 lists of Brad's sad bad or something like that. And that, it can be effective to do that. But, if they have had the experience of retrospectives that are too inwardly focused or repetitive, or they just never get beneath the surface, I get why they think they're not so useful. And as you point out, Ryan, having a particular focus that says, how are we fitting into the organization? How are we working with groups around us? How are we working with our customer? Really can bring a huge amount of value to a team.
Yeah, you remind me of a situation I was in at at the last full-time gig I took, where they flew me out to Pennsylvania. We visited with a team, and the Agile coach on site pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we'd really love to see how you do a retro. I've already got the retro board from the last 5 retros up. The Post-its, they don't change much, so we just keep talking about this stuff. Would you facilitate this for me?" And I'm like, wait a minute, we're using the board from the last retro that hasn't changed from 5 previous retros. Where have we improved? And he's like, well, these are just things we can't fix, but we like to talk about them. And I thought, okay, and the team, when you walk in, you see the whole development team is completely disengaged. Mm-hmm. They are completely disinterested in this because it's a waste of their time.
Sure.
They've got a plus-minus delta, the mad, sad, glad, the what went well, what didn't, what should we change format on their board. And even some of the Post-its are getting kind of crusty, like they're starting to fall. And I'm saying, can we try something different? And we ran a modified sailboat.
Yeah.
Basically, the sailboat retro is, what's the wind in our sails? What's the anchors holding us back? Where are the dangers in the water? Directionally, where are we going? I like to modify it to a pirate ship where basically we add dry land, which is the product vision and the goal and the outcomes we're after, just so that the product owner can have some kind of insight into whether or not their vision is resonating with the development team. And so we go through all this, and the board, their old board, maybe had 5 or 6 ideas on it. I think after 120 Post-it notes, we were just swamped with things that the team really, what was bothering them, what they needed to work on. I ended up having to combine. I ended up going through a Starfish to filter all this stuff down. So what do we need more of, less of, start, stop, and keep? And we got down to 2 or 3 things that they could do immediately. Like they could go back today and start working on these 3 things and make real progress. And it was the first time in probably 3 months, I was told later on by a development manager who wasn't in the room, who just heard secondhand feedback. First time in months, they were excited about what they were doing. And I thought, all right, I can totally empathize with teams who are saying, nah, we don't need to retro anymore. Let's just get back to work. And then, yeah. But then I also have this thing anchored in my mind now where when a team can actually go off and do something to help themselves, man, that's just invigorating.
That's super powerful. That is super powerful for so many reasons.
What a great opportunity to learn true self-organization, first and foremost, right? With such an ethereal term, it's, oh yeah, just go self-organize. No one knows what that means. I mean, no one gets that. But when you actually create those opportunities, suddenly that starts to set in a little bit. Man, those teams, Faye, I know you've seen this in your current engagement where when these teams just get a little bit of leeway, just some boundaries, and then go out there and do some cool stuff, I mean, they get excited, right?
Yeah, they do. And it really is just about that sense that you have some control over the environment in which you're working in. And then for me, I don't see collaboration taking place in any environment that doesn't allow that, right? Not true collaboration, because people they're sort of conditioned at this point to wait for next instruction, and those usually come as single-threaded assignments. So I'm thinking, and what I'm witnessing, if you really want your teams to be collaborating together, you have to kind of lay the guidelines out like this, and then give them space to organize as they would choose to. Yeah.
So the psychological term for this is agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Teams feel like they have some agency or some control over their own fate, some control over the way they're working together, which I'm sad to say in many work environments feels quite foreign.
Yes, and often when I'm brought in, I have a technical focus as a coach. I'm brought in with the idea that what we perceive our problems to be primarily are technical, and it's a good while usually before that's true. And so that's sort of the cover that gets me in the door, but it's always human issues, as we learned from someone that are at the fore. So what's important when I come from my small behavior modification point of view, I have to understand the context in which I'm trying to encourage people to change their behavior. Usually there's a lot I have to pay attention to about how things got the way they got before I can hope for a small change from anybody.
Right. Esther, I've actually been quoting you a lot lately. Something that came up in a talk I recently heard you give about honoring the past when we're attempting a change, and we don't do a great job of that. But we have to remember that, odds are, the way things are, was at one point in the past something we desired. We maybe thought at one point that was exactly what we wanted, or we opted into choices that led us to that outcome. So honoring how we got there, why things existed the way that they did, and honoring what we learned from them is important, and we need that in order to move forward.
Yeah, that's part of what I would say is a thorny bootstrap problem for reflection and improvement, is that if you're stuck in that kind of a situation, you're stuck in more ways than one. And just expressing the wish as an outsider that we reflect and improve is completely insufficient to start seeing some reflection and improvement.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think referring back to the talk you mentioned, it's like paradoxically, honoring the past makes it easier for people to let go of it.
Right.
Right. And if people feel like, well, you need to improve, someone's coming in and saying, you need to improve, you need to inspect and adapt. There's a sort of subtle implication there that what you're doing isn't right. And
exactly. And I've seen consultants do that a lot. And that's not fair. Not just consultants. It's sometimes people just coming into a new role and wanting to put their stamp on something and not taking the time to understand why the current situation exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually was in a situation in prior jobs where a manager or a VP would kind of get upset at me when I spent the first week just watching. Right? And I tried to explain that if I come in too hot, if I come in and suggest something that doesn't resonate, if I can't ask the right question that maintains the team's agency, or I like to use Dan Pink's autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I think both of them are very congruent. If I can't find ways to enhance their autonomy, mastery, and then reveal their purpose, they're not going to trust me. They're not going to want me there. And that's really hard for many of these organizations to swallow, that they're going to pay an Agile coach or a consultant just to watch.
Right.
As Yogi Berra said, you can absorb a lot just by watching.
Well, it's an interesting thing that, if you come in and you say right away, you're doing, you should be doing this or you should be doing that, even if you don't say you're doing it wrong. There's a sort of an implication that, I am so smart that I see right away within 5 instants that you guys have been really not doing things correctly. And that dishonors the intelligence and humanity of the people who are there, right? So what you're saying, Ryan, you spend some time, you spend days or weeks observing, getting to know people, understanding how they're working. That's essentially respect. Right? You're respecting them. You're taking time to learn something about them, to learn what they struggle with, what they are good at, what they're up against, and all of this communicates respect.
And what they're already aware of. I mean, there's a good chance that they know their problems just as well as anybody else does.
Right, and there's many times I talk to groups that I'm getting to know, and they not only do they know that, they've been making these recommendations. So
yes.
You can come in and make the same recommendations, And if you don't do it in that respectful way, find a respectful way to share those, then you've also alienated the people who actually agree with you.
That's actually a great tip in inverse form. So one of the best things you can do to get them to understand your respect is to ask them, what have they wished would change? And what do they wish you would say the exact same way they've been saying it, but from you? And then say that. They probably have a good idea, and you can probably get it to work just by being an outsider. And then you champion something that already has been important to them. Well, now you have their ear a little bit.
I've actually taken this a step further. So I've tried to find the people who have been advocating the same things that I'm about to recommend, and I include them in that meeting and in that discussion.
Right.
I actually want them to, hey, I sat down with this person, and I try to tee it up in a way that, hey, I sat down with Jane, and Jane she's got this great idea. I'd love for all of you to hear. I totally support it. My observations are behind it. Jane, would you go ahead and tell them the things you're seeing? Because I think this is where we need to work.
Lovely.
Because it's not about me in the organization. If I'm approaching this as from a servant leadership position, my agendas, my wants, my needs are secondary to the teams I'm serving, right? And I try to frame it that way in all things, and I have found so two things happen, right? The teams you're working with, you make a lot more progress sooner because they realize this person's not here to show them up. This person is here to really help. It also gets me out the door quicker, and some consultants, I think they just had a minor heart attack. We're not supposed to be embedded for 36 months. That would be my opinion. If we're coming in from the outside to offer insights and to do some help, our goal isn't longevity. My honest opinion, and some consultants might blast me on Twitter for that, but I mean, if I'm somewhere more than 8 weeks, and even that's a long time to me now, I've become part of the system and I need to get out. Like, I really need to nudge the system of work that I'm working in, share some insights, help some people really, reveal some things, and have some honest feedback and communication, but then be willing to get out. It preserves my agency. If I'm worried about being embedded, I may not speak total truth to power.
Right.
That's a fact.
I think it's a yes and. So I would emphasize the embedded piece. So if you're there roughly full time for X amount of weeks, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. And the way I sometimes work is that I will visit every month or every couple of months for 3 years.
Yes, absolutely, totally agree. But Esther, you're not an employee, and you get to leave, and you're willing to walk away. And I think that's the catch where we get stuck. Like when a team comes up with a really juicy thing in a retro, and if we're worried about that 4th year renewal, man, how are we really going to go after it?
Yeah, Ryan, what you said, first of all, I love the way that you do that, where you find someone's voice inside the company that is not getting heard and make sure that it is heard. And you're saying, consulting is not about maximizing the duration of your contract. In fact, you want to get out sooner. And I think what is often our remit, what is our goal as a consultant, especially those of us with a coaching mindset, is how do we rehabilitate feedback loops inside this company that have gone bad? How do we get this company to notice itself and pay attention to itself and orient itself? And so that's exactly what I loved about your example, is that you find someone who's already trying to say this and make sure they get heard. I think it's great.
I agree.
Go ahead, Esther.
No, I was just agreeing.
I appreciate that. And I used to operate differently, but now that's my favorite way to go. And like I said, it means I'm out the door quicker. But actually, I'm happier that way. Like I love visiting new teams. I love working with people. I love serving at a team level in short bursts. And Esther, I actually embrace your model quite often as well, where I'll come back every 3 months. I'll come back every 4 or 5 weeks initially, whatever the cadence we set out. And I'll spend a few days, and we'll make a few more nudges. We'll make sure the system's moving. And then I'm going to leave, and I want to see what you do with it. Now, in the meantime, people are hitting me on Slack, and they're sending me emails, and they're having these moments of crisis. And I will still ask questions and try to help reveals things, but not necessarily solve everything for them. And that it's not like I've gone dark for that duration, but at the same time, I'm not scared to come back that next 3-month period or after 3 months and go to the leadership and say, these are the things I'm seeing. We're still not making progress. What do we do? Yeah. And you do that without fear, right?
Yeah, and I view that as being sort of a guide. Is that you're not there to do things for the company. You're not there to tell them how to do things. You're there to help them become aware of what their own capabilities are and nudge the system, and then they'll make some progress, and then you come in and you look at how things are, and you maybe help them become aware of some other things and offer some other nudges, right? So it's a very different model than I'm the consultant here to fix it for you,
right?
So my version of this model is it's a little bit tweaked because, again, I have a technical focus, but it's the same idea. My preferred way of working, which I learned from Llewellyn Falco, is who's been on the show before, is 2 weeks on, and there's a format that we fill the time very effectively with. We could talk more about that elsewise, but it's 2 weeks on and 4 weeks off. And the idea is, first of all, if you have me with you for 2 weeks, that's pretty intense, and it's going to be more than you want to listen to, even if I make my funniest jokes after about 2 weeks of that. And the second part is, I've done the opposite, where I've been embedded with one team in my first coaching gig for an entire year. If the goal is to see behavior change, why are we waiting a year to see if we get it? Let's do a small thing. Let's see what happens when he's gone. And when we come back, if it was valuable to them, they'll keep it. If something came up that made it hard for them, we'll hear about it. And again, the goal is, what is life like without me? I'm not important. What they do in their context with their lives is important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so these days, Esther, you pulled on something much, much earlier that I made a mental note to get back to. It's liberating structures. Mm-hmm. And so these days, these shorter engagements, what it looks like for me is, 2 weeks of liberating structures and standing up teams and getting a new Scrum team up and going, but using liberating structures to set vision and focus and team chartering and working agreements and really getting into what the teams want and how to get them in flight. And we're seeing a ton of really good results with these 2-week bursts focused around liberating structures, because we're getting every voice heard. We're finding out what the needs of the organization, the product owner, the dev team. We're getting this alignment up front, and then standing up, getting a product backlog in place and getting teams working and sprinting. But these liberating structures are like the linchpin that we've really had a ton of success with. Actually, our Advanced Scrum Master course, the PSM2 course that I think I've talked about this on the show, that Todd Miller and I are teaching all over the country. It's based on liberating structures. So it's 2 days of advanced Scrum Mastership, but it's all liberating structure based, where we're exploring together. Todd and I are learning a ton as we go as well. But these things, I think these are the new shiny things that will be huge in the next year or so. And as far as retrospectives go, we've been using MinSpec and 1-2-4-all, 2510, crowdsourcing. I mean, these things are immensely powerful with the right focusing question. And Esther, you've brought them up. I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, but these liberating structures has actually reinvigorated my interest in this whole profession.
Well, I like liberating structures, and there are a lot of other facilitated processes that are equally wonderful. What I really love is that facilitation is being recognized as a crucial skill for leadership and for teams.
Yep.
I mean, 15 years ago, people used to make fun of me for my emphasis on facilitation. It was kind of dismissed as just a kind of fluffy thing. But I think it's really a crucial skill for leadership, because it enables you to create a structure for people to think together and learn together and create together, right, and innovate together. And it's extraordinarily powerful. So I'm super glad that people are paying attention, not just to that particular form of those liberating structures and their there are methods which are fantastic, but to facilitation in general.
Yeah, it's been that's one area where I used to lean more on coaching, and for some reason I didn't appreciate facilitation as much. Now it's at the forefront. A friend of mine at a recent class, he asked the room. He's like, we all keep talking about facilitation, and this is 20 Scrum Masters in a room in an advanced course, and he goes, do we know what facilitation is? Like, can anyone define facilitation? And so Todd and I are kind of standing there like, we think we can, but we might have been a little unsure, because it's a very direct and kind of one of those odd questions where you're worried about the trap. But no one really could define it well in the room. And he finally said, look, facilitation is all about making things simpler. If we're using these complex structures, and if we're adding our baggage to a discussion, and if we're blocking conversation, we're making things harder, which is the antithesis of facilitation. Stop doing those things. And that conversation went on for quite a while, and it was actually very well facilitated by this person. But I found that idea that we're trying to make things simpler, and whether that's through a retrospective, whether that's through any other event, or trying to get to consensus, whatever it is. I mean, Esther, I think you're right. Whatever structures you're using, that is immensely powerful, especially in these wildly complex organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crucial for engagement. It's crucial for participation, for creativity. Yeah.
No matter how much I learn about facilitating, it's not enough yet. There's always some new skill or some new idea that I'm going to need, that I'm going to find out when I don't have it, what it is. And there's just so much to learn. It's so useful.
I agree. I agree that because as much as there's always going to be a new situation that doesn't quite fit the tool that you already have. So it's just about, for me, it's about constantly increasing that toolkit that I carry around with me.
So I this is kind of serendipitous, and I'm going to ask a selfish question, because this is an area that I'm focusing on. So I hope the listeners find this valuable as well. But since I've got three of you on who I respect as facilitators, and this is a skill that, like I said, I've used it before, and I've become very fluent in the liberating structures. But to improve, what have you done? Resources, books, workshops, courses, trainings. These can be your own. These can be others. What have you really found that helped really level you up as a facilitator, and really helped give you that perspective and toolkit, and just the ability to really excel in this stance?
Well, I don't know that I do, but
all right.
And
so
I don't know that I could.
Is one step. What else, Amitai?
Sure. Yeah, I got that part nailed. But so I can't exactly point to all the sources either. I think step 0 is to be in a receptive mode where things can come and influence you. And it's useful more than just for facilitating. I can say 2 influences in particular that have been large off the top of my head. One is G. Paw Hill, who writes about how people work together in teams in a way that is kind of real and raw and speaks to me. And so maybe people here will find that he speaks to them as well. And the second one is when my wife was doing her PhD work. It was in how animals learn from each other and influence each other, both human and non-human animals. And that gave me this frame of mind of getting out of the mode of language and getting into the mode of the many other ways that animals communicate with each other and react to each other and send messages to each other. And so I'm by no means expert at that, but it was such a useful frame. I think it colors everything else that I learned.
I think the best facilitation training I have encountered is technology of participation. And it is based on the way people think and process information when they're thinking clearly, and it helps people think together in groups. It was actually developed by a very interesting organization called the ICA that has done community development work all over the world with literate societies and societies that don't have written language, but this flow of how people think together underlies all their methods. It's very flexible once you know how to take account of how people naturally process information. And so that, in my experience, has been one of the most powerful facilitation models I have learned. And so you put that on top of what Amitai has said, and you end up with an open mind, a receptiveness, some understanding about how groups work together, and then you have a set of methods that help create a structure for groups to think, learn, and decide together.
How about you, Faye?
I think for me, it has been working on developing my own personal reflection practice. So when I encounter something new, and for me, I'm getting in new ideas, new techniques, witnessing and participating in new techniques from a variety of sources, whether it's online communities or conferences that I've attended. And I will give a shout out again to Esther and her partner Don Gray in teaching and coaching beyond the team. Just experiencing different facilitation techniques like that, and then within a rather short period of time, meaning within 3 to 4 days at the most, I try to reflect back on what I experienced, what I was exposed to, and how that relates to what I've been doing. So for example, if I encounter a new technique, what situation am I a part of right now that I might be able to instantly go use that? Or what situation could that have helped me with in the past, and how might I have used it? So actually thinking of concrete examples from my own experience to relate them to helps solidify the technique, helps me think through how I might make it my own.
Yeah, I have to agree there, Faye, that watching Esther and Don co-facilitate coaching beyond the team, that really influenced the way that that Todd and I co-facilitate our training courses. It influences the way that, I think, Faye, it even influenced the way that you and I co-present when we're lucky enough to get a keynote or the opportunity to present together. Amitai, I know we've used similar skills together. That really was a huge influence on I think how we've approached those things going forward. And that is, I think that's another one. Coaching Beyond the Team is one that to check out as well for that. But yeah, go ahead.
I feel that I'm constantly watching too for that sort of, it's almost like a meta level. So the Coaching Beyond the Team is a good example. I'm there to experience the content that is being presented there, but I'm also watching how it's being presented.
So and I think the hot tip there, Faye, that you're getting at is be aware. Like when you,
right.
if there's an event, a meeting, something, a workshop that you went to and you thought, wow, that was just, I was engaged and people were excited and the content was flowing, and take a moment and, I mean, first of all, if you go up to the presenter and say, that was wonderfully facilitated, can you tell me more about that? You'll probably make them blush. They'll probably love that feedback. But also watch the meta and be aware of that. I think that's a great tip, Faye.
And that's a lesson that I got from Esther and Jerry at Problem Solving Leadership. Just, what is there to be aware of? You can learn more things to be aware of. You can become aware of things to be aware of by watching what expert facilitators like these two did. And so that gave me things to watch for that I never would have thought to watch for.
Well, I'm blushing now.
See, it works.
Yes. Well, since we've made Esther blush, that's probably the sign that we need to wrap up, because I think Amitai turns into a pumpkin in about 10 minutes.
That's right.
And so maybe we'll go ahead and get into the wrap up here. But I just want to say I appreciate the three of you jumping on this episode. And this was a winding adventure through retrospectives and facilitation and some coaching and some awareness. And it's exactly what I needed, given some of the things going on in our community. Just this great conversation about all the things we can do to get better, to close feedback loops, But what I heard through all this was supporting one another and lifting each other up. And that's such a positive message that I think we need right now. And I really, really appreciate all of that. And so for the wrap up, please let us know what you're up to. Esther, I hope you tell people where they can go to get your retrospective course and anything else that you have going on. Faye and Amitai, I know you're both super busy in the community and that you've got Faye, Path to Agility is coming up. Amitai, I believe you're available for work in New York. Please feel free to promote all of that. Let people know how they can continue to engage with you, whether it's on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever your preferred platform is, and anything else you care to discuss. I'll open up the floor. Esther, we'd love to start with you.
EstherDerby.teachable.com is where you can find my online retrospectives class, and my website is EstherDerby.com. I'll send you some notes so you can put that in. I'll also send some notes about the technology of participation facilitation training that I mentioned, because there's several classes coming up. And I think I'll make a discount code for your listeners who want to sign up for my retro class.
That is incredibly gracious. So Esther was wonderful enough to let me preview the course before she published it. I loved it. I highly recommend this to everyone. I'm actually in all of my Scrum.org courses. It is referenced and sent out in the follow-up email to my students. Hopefully Esther's seeing some signups there. I can't recommend this enough. This is something that I believe that people need to see. It's time to really get good at this skill. And I think facilitating valuable retrospectives is a true skill that we can all learn. And it just has immediate payback and improvement and enhancement of not only teams' lives, but on the work that they do. So thank you for that, Esther. Let's go to Faye. Faye, what do you have going on? What can you? How can we keep talking with you? And hey, when are we keynoting again?
I don't know. We need to find one. I also just haven't seen you in a long time, so we need to sort that out. Probably the best way to get a hold of me is on Twitter. I'm at Agile Faye. I'd love to interact with everyone there. What I have coming up, you mentioned Path to Agility. We're just getting started with some plans around that. Esther and I are working with Joe Perald also to put together some content for World Retrospective Day on February 27th. So
what was that date again?
February 27th.
Excellent.
Yeah, so we have a variety of content, activities that we're hoping to make available to the wider audience. And then I think last year we had maybe 69 different communities around the world participating in retrospective activities within the same 24-hour period. And it was super cool, so we're doing it again. So
I have a question for Faye and Esther. You don't have to commit, or I'm not asking anything like that, but I mean, what if we did an Agile for Humans activity on World Retro Day? Maybe I would throw some money into it. We would perhaps live stream on Twitch or YouTube and figure out what that could look like.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
okay, we'll talk
I love
offline.
the idea.
And let's make an Agile for Humans World Retrospective Day activity happen.
Excellent. I like it.
Yep, I'm in.
And then I also want to make a shameless plug for the Agile Alliance Conference that's next August in Washington, D.C. this year. But submissions are open now, and now is the perfect time to put together a submission and get some dedicated, focused feedback from your review teams. The schedule really heats up a little bit later on, but if you've always wanted to submit and you would just like a little bit of guidance about how to make your submission the best it possibly can be, right now is the best time to do that. And the next time to see me live, I believe, will be in March. I'll be at Agile India, so I'll be excited to.
Goodness.
Yeah, I'm excited to connect with that community a little bit more, and they always have really cool programs put together. So I'm excited to take part in that.
So I'm very happy to have heard about this global retrospective day. I was recently able to participate in Global Day of Code Retreat, which is an annual event for mostly people who are interested in spending a day with code. And I was a co-facilitator for the event in Brooklyn, but it's also a global thing. So we talked to other groups doing the same thing elsewhere around the world. I also recently presented a mob programming workshop for a couple meetups in the New York area. And so this is what I'd like to offer for next year. I have some availability in the first quarter in the New York area for companies that would like a code retreat, which we can do anytime, on your premises with your people, or a mob programming workshop to introduce the concepts and practice it, or anything else. You can also see me in public at DevOps Days, which is in January in New York City, and you can tweet me at Schmons, and my company is Latent Agility, Latent Agility. So please get in touch. Super cool.
Very cool. Good luck with that. Safe travels. To piggyback onto Faye's comment about the big conference, Agile 2019, I'm actually co-chairing the Enterprise Agile track with Cheryl Hammond. So Basket Case and I are checking out all the submissions for Enterprise Agile. She's totally awesome to work with. This is 2019 is the year of no, but I couldn't say no to this, especially with her involved. So I went ahead and joined in on this adventure. Thank you to Brandon Carlson and the rest of the organization team for letting me do that. And we're trying to put together a great track for Enterprise Agile. So if you have a submission, Cheryl and I will take a look at it. Faye is right. Now is the time where you can get feedback from she and I and the rest of our review team. And I think it's the opportune time to get those in. But otherwise, so I am, as always, your host, Ryan Ripley. My focus these days is on teaching courses all around the globe. My events are available online. If you want to spend 2 days with me and some other great trainers, check that out. Would love to see the Agile for Humans community in the courses. For next year, 2019, we've got some exciting developments. There's a ton of new equipment sitting here in my office. We'll be looking at some more live shows, some more activities like that to really grow the brand, but also more importantly, get more content out to the world. So keep an eye out for that. 2019 is going to be pretty exciting for the podcast and the YouTube channel, some Twitch activity, a lot of great live video stuff coming, and hopefully a few more surprises. So we'll see how 2019 unravels, but right now it looks like it's going to be even more amazing than 2018, and I think giving the numbers from the show and the downloads and the listener support, I get emails, LinkedIn messages, tweets every day from people just saying, hey, Ryan, thank you for bringing these people together. I really got a lot out of it. People are learning a lot, and that's just so overwhelming. I don't know about the three of you, but when someone shoots those messages at you, you just have this moment where, all right, it's cool to see that people are liking the things you're putting out in the world, and we get so much of that feedback and support from the community, so just thank you for that. For 2019, how can we serve you? So go ahead and tweet at Ryan Ripley. Let me know, who would you like to see on the show? What topics do you want to see covered? How can we serve you, the listener, and make sure that you're getting the most value? I think, especially if you're listening here at the end, you're the hardcore listener, you're the person that we really want to hear from. Let us know. How can we serve you? Who do you want to hear from? What topics are important to you? And we'll work on that backlog for 2019. So that's enough rambling. That's enough said. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Thank you, Esther, Faye, and Amitai. This was incredibly fun and serendipitous. We went in these fun spaces, and I think we all had the opportunity to explore some things and really enjoyed that. So thank you. And to the community out there, thanks for being there. Thanks for listening. And we'll talk to all of you next time.
You're listening to Agile for Humans with Ryan Ripley. Learn more at ryanripley.com.